Welcome to Jahmi Roc's Jottings, your seriously silly space to hear deep insights on music, especially reggae and samba reggae. It is my intention to share meaningful musicological arguments and observations, to inspire and frankly pass my doctoral exams. Welcome all. I'm your host, Jahmi Roc, aka Raquel Bernard. Let's start jamming. This is a brand new podcast that centers on gender and spirituality in post-colonial liberation musics. Now, that is a very loaded reference to a field that brings in scholarship from many different areas. Put a bit more plainly, how and why do people sing for freedom? On each episode of this podcast, you will hear me talking about at least 3 scholars and how their contributions impact my understanding of liberation tunes. In this episode, I'm focused on elaborating on the terms post-colonial and gender. When I talk about post-colonial, I am thinking about the terms like decolonial and about the ways that nations formed after the end of colonization. Like literary and cultural theorist Leela Gandhi does in her book Postcolonial Theory, A Critical Introduction, I am thinking about how nations relate to the colonial past, how they remember it, and how those memories inform the present relations of power. When I talk about gender, I am focused on the role of women in scholarship that centers womanism and feminism. But I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge that gender identity is much more capacious and vast, bounding beyond the experience of cis women. Today, I will be sharing my jottings about 3 scholars. You've already heard me name one, Leela Gandhi, who again is a literary and cultural theorist. She writes about transnational literatures, postcolonial theory and ethics, and the intellectual history of the 19th and 20th centuries. The other 2 scholars are Gary Okihiru and Zoe Sherinian. Okihiru is a scholar who got his PhD in African Studies. Currently, he's at Yale in American Studies. He was a professor of international and public affairs at Columbia in New York City, and he was the founding director of Columbia's Center for the Study of Ethnicity and Race. He was instrumental in founding the field of Asian American Studies. I enjoy his style of writing because it's clear-cut and it's direct. It's not confusing. You can just read it and it sounds like you're listening to him talk. In his book, Third World Studies, he charts the emergence of the field. And again, that's the field of Third World Studies, especially its entrance at San Francisco State College. The Third World Liberation Front is the name of this student group that had demanded that the field itself be institutionalized. Their focus was on creating a new humanism, a new consciousness that empowered Third World people. Self-determination is the goal of the field. In fact, Okihiru goes as far as to say that liberation is called self-determination. For my interest, an understanding of Third World Studies is pivotal. I am interested in the ways that women of color use samba reggae and reggae to combat racism and sexism. So the locations that center my work are indeed third world countries, Brazil and Jamaica. At the same time, I cannot properly position my research without drawing from my lessons in African and African American studies and cultural studies. Those are my bachelor's and master's respectively. Scholars like Zoe Sherinian point to this field from her position in ethnomusicology when she recounts the work of African American feminist Frances Beale, who outlined the impact of racism, sexism, and capitalism on the lives of African American women. Beale actually founded the Black Women's Liberation Caucus, which over time became the Third World Women's Alliance, because women of color and Third World women face similar forces of oppression and exploitation that cut across racial divides. Zoe Sherinian is an associate professor and chair of ethnomusicology at the University of Oklahoma. She's a percussionist and a filmmaker. Her ethnographic film on the changing status of the lead drummers is titled This is music, reclaiming an untouchable drum. Nice, right? I love that. Gary Okihiro explains that this field, Third World Studies, did not last in its original construction. He explains how ethnic studies was the replacement, so to speak. Third World Studies and ethnic studies are distinct fields that converge in some ways and then they're disparate in other ways. He posits that at the inception of Third World Studies, when it gained institutionalization, it became Chicago ethnic studies. And like the independence movies in the, independence movements, hear me? Do you hear me? Sometimes I be slipping up. I am an intellectual, but sometimes I be slipping up. And you just got to be ready for that, all right? Again, we out here to be silly and serious, so don't mind the slip ups. So now, Okihiro is explaining that, like the independence movements in the Third World, the field turned to cultural nationalism and the nation state. Okihiro takes up various relevant studies that influence Third World studies, such as feminist and queer theories. He identifies the grounding tenets of post-1968 ethnic studies, African American studies, Native American studies, Chicano studies, and Asian American studies, and points to how they clarify and explain the subjects of Third World studies. Respectively, these tenets are land and labor for post-1968 ethnic studies, indigeneity and sovereignty for Native American studies, transnational community for African American studies, migrant labor for Asian American studies, and borderlands for Chicano studies. It's no wonder that I'm thrilled about the subject of liberation as an African and African American Studies graduate. Hello there, woo woo. Dartmouth, class of 2013 in the house. Okihiro recalls that Nathan here, the principal scholar of Black Studies at San Francisco State College and PhD of University Chicago's Sociology Department, regards the field, African American Studies, as a mass movement and a mass struggle. It was formulated to rid the world of racism and achieve Black self-determination. So I ask, how do women represent and present Black self-determination? A song like Judy Mowatt's Black Woman calls out oppression. And for me, I think it's the first step at self-determination, bringing to light the imbalance of power. This song is a rallying cry that encourages Black women with words like, "Don't give up now, just pray for strength now." This is a call to invest in the struggle for freedom. Thinking about these lyrics is part of why the larger field of Jahmi Roc's jottings brings together both gender and spirituality. Judy Mowatt aligns Black women with biblical women who faced horrific circumstances and frames their quest for liberation in spiritual terms. Both Okihiro and Gandhi mentioned Albert Memmi's basically his theory of mimicry. And this mimicry term means a process by which colonized people emulate the colonizer. Leela Gandhi turns to Vikram Seth's novel A Suitable Boy to speak about the problematic nature of this desire of the colonizer from the colonized, right? So I'm going to say that again. This book by Vikram Seth, A Suitable Boy, speaks to this problematic nature of this desire of the colonizer from the colonized, right, in specific terms. She then turns to Foucault to speak more about power, saying that according to him, there is no outside to power. It is always already everywhere. For me, the omnipresence of power is why exercising it is so potentially destructive. Okihiro talks about the mental enslavement that Carter G. Woodson, Carter G. Woodson, founder of Negro History and Black History Month, Carter G. Woodson's call to miseducation. See, what he calls miseducation is related to what Leela Gandhi says when she turns to Ashish Nandi, who says that this colonialism colonizes minds in addition to bodies, and it releases forces within colonized societies to alter their cultural priorities once and for all. When I classify Judy Mowatt's Black Woman as a post-colonial liberation tune, I'm thinking about the ways that she demands a new cultural prioritizing by singing, I see your affliction, to you I dedicate my song. Now, Black Woman's reference to biblical women makes Zoe Sherinian's book, Tamil Folk Music as Dalit Liberation Theory, a powerful source for dialogue. The text is focused on former untouchables who have been oppressed by the caste system in India since birth. It is an ethnographic work, and the central trickster figure is Reverend J. Theophilus Apavu. The community of Tamil Dalit Christian villagers, seminary students, activists, and theologians who have been inspired by Apavu's work, his music in particular, and the way that it works for social justice, are a part of the reform movement within the mainline Protestant Church of South India in Tamil Nadu, which is the 10th largest state in India. Now, recall, I am framing Okihiro, Gandhi, and Sherinian together to make clear the connections of post-colonial thinking within a third world studies paradigm. The same camaraderie that Okihiro points to among third world actants is reaffirmed again when Sherinian explains that this movement of anti-caste former untouchables borrow ideas from Latin American liberation theology. At the same time, indigenous roots are at work, namely the 19th century Indian social gospel missions and the early 20th century secular and social equality Dravidian language movement. Sherinian points out that Tamil folk music has transformative power, which led the Christian believer to adopt the term Dalit, which according to Apavu means an identity of the oppressed people fighting for liberation. In Apavu's music and the Dalit musical theology movement, indigenization of Christianity through theology, language, and musical style sets the purpose of religious discourse back to emancipating the poor and oppressed. Additionally, social identity reformation for Dalit Christians is made possible by the transformative, recreative power of music in context of performance. This is precisely the work I propose that Judy Mowatt's song achieves. Come with me, yes, you, come with me. Consider the second verse of Black Woman. We are forsaked once in the plantation, lashes to our skin. On auction blocks we were chained and sold, handled merchandise. Highly abused and warmth we were refused and thrown in garbage bins. But no need for that now. Free us, stand on back now and help me sing my song. Mowatt sets the stage for the religious discourse in the third verse, which brings in Rachel, Mother Moses, Mary, and Joseph to be directly applicable to African-descended women whose ancestors faced the cruelty of enslavement. When she sings, "Free us, stand on back now," she makes use of the transformative, recreative power of music. Put another way, this is not simply singing. This is catalyzing real-world change. She engages listeners and encourages them to sing with her, not because the chorus of voices will sound sweet, although it will, but because those crooning listeners will achieve transformation when they join in. How is this possible? Well, we can return to Apavu, who actually wrote a book about Tamil folklore called Folklore for Change, 1986. And imagine, if you will, the remix, Black Women's Reggae for Change. African descended Brazilian women's sambehege for change. Apavu investigated the ways that Tamil villagers used folk music as an everyday form of resistance. Indigenizing Christian music with Tamil folk music was a way to change attitudes toward oppressed communities, even in the reflexive. Sharinian goes as far to compare Tamil folk music in this context with the use of "We Shall Overcome" in 1940s labor movements and 1960s civil rights music. You remember that one? We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. I could keep on going, but you know what I'm talking about. According to Sharinian, music is a means to dialogically generate the sources of empowerment and the motivation toward action. On that note, I'd like to conclude this first official episode of Jahmi Roc's Jottings with a personal anecdote. When I was a senior at Dartmouth College, I took a class with the powerhouse freedom singer Bernice Reagan Johnson. She taught our approximately 40-person class that freedom songs, which were often remixes of church hymns, was a way to defy racist oppression. She talked about the ways that a protester could be getting arrested and still singing. In that way, they were refusing the power being used to arrest them. I will always remember her words about the ability of singing to transform emotional and mental states. She would say, you could be depressed, you could be bogged down, but when you run sound through your body, you can shift that energy entirely. This is part of the reason I am thrilled to continue defining the field of gender and spirituality in post-colonial liberation musics. As a Jamaican immigrant and American citizen, I identify with Frances Beale and her move to align the struggles of African American women and third world women. The terms I set out to contextualize, postcolonial and gender, create an orbit that acknowledges the power of education to liberate once enslaved minds and the need to chant down patriarchy. Mowatt's outro to Black Women resounds, Black woman, ooh, black woman, I know you've struggled long. I feel your afflictions, to you I dedicate my song. The struggle of women of color is central to my research, and music centered on liberation or self-determination is my jam. Join me next time as I consider theories of nation. This has been Jahmi Roc. Thank you for listening. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Jahmi Roc's Jottings. I hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to subscribe and hop on over to my artist page to hear some music that I hope changes the world for at least one soul. You can find me on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and TikTok at Jahmi Roc. I look forward to sharing more musical moments with you next time. Take care and keep jamming.